Hello, Gino here, and you are listening to Otherworld Connections. We live in a critical time where now, more than ever, angels and fairies, hidden forces, are bursting at the seams of the veil to work with us. They want to see us change in order to save the world and live in service to others. So join me on a journey to empowerment and enlightenment with an angelic angle and a fairy focus, looking into ways to improve our current situation, morality, archetypes, solutions for self-healing, and spiritual sciences in light of theosophy and other occult traditions. Hello. Welcome back to Otherworld Connections. I'm your host Gino, and in today's show, we are continuing with Bernard Rogers' 2013 book, The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose. And at some point in time, they were all called Mother Goose Stories. Mother Goose being something we are going to read about in this book. This book is super, what's the word? Just important to the work that I've been doing with the Secret Kindergarten and Otherworld Connections. So it's a little bit vain, but to just read the whole thing. But there was nothing that I wanted to leave out. So we're just going to do that, make comments on it. And we are up to, we're just going through chapter 1. How did the Tales of Wonder get their name? And we're talking about, we'll be going through different exploring, I would say, the etymology of the different names for fairy tales, being things like fairy tales, old wives' tales, Mother Goose stories, and so on and so forth. And you were just listening to Crosstalk with Sarah Cross. She's doing a very interesting exploration. I try not to use the word interesting because there's a better word for being interested in things. That I've got to extend this vocabulary, and I admire Sarah's efforts in reading these ye-old stories and poems. I just trip up on so many words when I'm reading these things. So Sarah did really well, and again, the word interesting, that, Sarah talked about the history, origins of the sonnet, and I think for a tarot thing, that really tickles my fancy, because I think one time I tried to describe fairy tales as something like poetry mixed with tarot, and I think poetry and the tarot, there's a strong connection there. My opinion, just off the top of my head, is that if you were to write poetry, that same space where you're looking for that verbal inspiration and to write, I think that area of the brain that's cranking or what have you is a similar space that you're using when you're using the tarot for learning about yourself and for guidance. Just my opinion, but I like to share that with you. So just a reminder. And you can check her show out Wednesdays, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's changed now. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. I've got to get my Eastern times right. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time, Studio A, right here on Revolution Radio. And just a reminder that you can find the link to anything I read or refer to during the show in the description of this episode once it's published on my website, thesecretkindergarten.com, and on all the blah blah blahs, YouTube, Substack. Have you noticed, Substack people, that Substack has exploded? Oh, Sarah Cross agrees with my comment. Thank you. That made my day. And Sarah Cross says, there is a theory that this is where the original inspiration started that led to the creation of card games such as the tarot, and I consider it as a great possibility. I'm with you on that, Sarah, and I really look forward to your show next week. I'm disappointed in myself that I missed the first 20 minutes because I slept in. But hey, yeah, one to check out for next week, absolutely. And yes, so here we go. Fairy tales. On a similar vein, we are looking at fairy tales, the origins, and the point. And we've already uncovered from what we read last week that the term fairy tale itself, through looking at the French language, Bernard Roger is French. Didn't know Roger was a French term, a French name, but hey, people can immigrate, right? Immigrate and immigrate. So he pointed out that there were other meanings to the term, being things along the lines of to calculate or a calculation, and a sort of pondering and thought, like a process that one must go through. These kind of connotations are associated with the origins of the term fairy tale. So, yeah, enough said about that. That's pointing us, all roads seem to be leading to Rome. And I think I'll have to turn up my rhetoric on fairy tales at some point and drop the humble pie and be like, fairy tales are the most important thing for kids and families and the communities. Read them all the time. Oh, right. Blue Stories. Now, already taking a pause here. Blue Stories. I had to look because obviously there's blue movies, right? So I had a look, and blue movies, right, adult films. At least that's an English term. Blue Stories. This is just, at the beginning, just having a look on the old, search engine. A blue story is a story of sort of the entanglement of two characters. Perhaps, I don't think it has to be romantic, but a narrative of two people in each other's lives and the drama between the two is a blue story. But we're going to find out in the context of fairy tales what we are talking about here with Blue Stories by, from the chapter, How Did the Tales of Wonder Get Their Name?, which is from Bernard Roger's book, The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales. So, Blue Stories, a collection of children's stories, was published in pamphlets with blue covers. I just got to stop. I've got to tell you one more thing, I'm starting to discover that I know actually quite a lot about not blue movies. I did not say that. About fairy tales and people studying them. So there are books on the study of fairy tales, not this book, which is why I'm so excited about finding this book, that there are sort of, I don't know, I don't want to call them neo-feminists, but they really are, saying that that fairy tales were originally dirty stories, parlor stories, barbershop stories that had been cleaned up. And the point of that, the point of their argument from that was just, who cares about fairy tales, really, to be honest. And some of them sort of went so far as to say that it was the women in the households that more like that cleaned them up, like the sanctity of the feminine, the feminine woman, turned fairy tales into something that had any value, if they even had any value, kind of thing. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So I wonder if, in these communities, because the books are of a similar time frame, in the last 10, 20, 30 years, I wonder if these people throw mud at each other. Slinging mud. So anyway, Blue Stories, a collection of children's stories, was published in pamphlets with blue covers. Pierre Larousse explained in his... Oh, here we go, guys. We're going to be speaking Gino French for the hour, explained in his Grand Dictionnaire Universel du okay, it has been concluded that this name, Blue Stories, came from a simple publishing custom, without wondering at all about its origin. However, the color blue was seen by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Goethe's here, in noteworthy fashion in his theory of colors. Goethe pops up all the time. I think I mention Goethe nearly every week here on the show. This color has this is what Goethe said. This color has a peculiar and almost indescribable effect on the eye. As a hue, it is powerful, but it is on the negative side, and in its highest purity is, as it were, a stimulating negation. Later, the author writes, a blue surface appears to retire from us. Rather than negation, perhaps we should use the word void in the sense that the void is the attraction of everything in potential. The blue of the sky, the diurnal transparency over the black of the interstellar void, draws the gaze towards its depths, like the ocean initially invites one to see the other side of the horizon. So, it's also why, the evening news has a lot of blue on the screen to yield to the lies. To encourage you to yield to the lies. All right. Entering the blue, writes Pierre Grisson, is a little like Alice in Wonderland going to the other side of the mirror. Blue is the color of the inaccessible depths of the sky on nice days, of the remote planet Jupiter, whose dominant gleam pierces through the nights. And I didn't know that it was Jupiter, but for some reason, maybe Pat Rabbit in the chat might have something to say, that almost all the planets were visible with the naked eye just the other day here in New Zealand. I saw, what are those orange stars? What's that orange star? Well, it turns out it was Mars. And that's about all I got there. All right, where was I? I'll finish this, and I just want to mention something in the chat. Mention something from the chat. So, blue is the color of Jupiter, whose dominant gleam pierces through the nights, the color of moonlight, of the robe of the Virgin Mary, and of the ancient statues of Mercury, as a psychopomp, that is, a guide of a person's soul into the afterlife. Blue is the color of air and of time, of the sensual and the nostalgic rhythms of jazz and blues. It is the color of water, which endlessly circulates around our globe and penetrates it everywhere, streaming up and falling down, and traverses all the world's living creatures, for which it forms the largest part of sap or blood, leaves, flowers, flesh, and marrow. Blue is the color of the vanishing horizon and the wind. Blue evokes a universal, primordial vehicle on the paths towards the infinity of space and time. In this way, stories are like fairy tales. In this way, blue stories are like fairy tales. And the moon is, is a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. It's a big deal, and there's a connection between fairy tales, the moon, this color blue. They're all in this sort of some symbolic family. I don't know how to put it, but I'm going to find more. We're going to find out more about the moon in coming episodes once we get this fairy tale business out of the way. And just moving back to the chat, Sarah Cross says, fairy tales have a great history. Oh wait, she said she loves Substack. That's right, I was saying Substack has, I didn't finish that thought. Substack has absolutely exploded in like the last couple of weeks. So if you, in terms of networking, which I'm just Mr. Non-network guy, but check out Substack, everybody. You could get in contact with your contemporaries or peers or heroes that are all rushing to jump on Substack, and they haven't put in the yards yet, so you'll get a lot of engagement with people you probably normally would not. Does that make sense? What I'm saying is every man and his dog now is jumping on Substack. And that's not to throw away, that's not to rag on Substack at all. Substack is really, really good. Yeah, Substack's great. And I get the most acknowledgement and recognition from genuine human beings that are just nice people. I can't believe that. So, hey, it's not a lot, but, it's something, and it's genuine, and it's just amazing. So Sarah Cross says, fairy tales have a great history, and yes, they were originally very dark and a little filthy. Reading the originals of the Hans Christian Andersen stories are saucy. Yes, I've left out Hans Christian Andersen. I do believe the reason I left them out is my understanding is they are for older children, which doesn't necessarily excuse the sauciness, does it? Reading The Little Mermaid, OMG, the original, I mean. You know what? I haven't read the original, and I plan to now. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, and we're going to move on to Mother Goose Stories. The Tales of My Mother the Goose. Mother, okay, in brackets, Mother Law, First Law. Fulcanelli again. Fulcanelli wrote in his study of the obelisk in Crecy Forest as an appendix to the revised edition of his Les Demeures Philosophales, Dwellings of the Philosophers, are hermetic narratives in which esoteric truth is combined with the marvelous and legendary decor of the Saturnalia, Paradise, or the Golden Age. So Mother Goose stories are hermetic narratives, according to Fulcanelli. Well, I say according to him, I mean, like, they are, right? They just are. We've proved it on Otherworld Connections, and there are books on it that we're just discovering. The Golden Age is the time when the animals spoke. A mythic time when all beings could communicate together through the verb. Given that oi, goose, like oi or oi, different spellings of oi, okay? Once, if I'm even saying that correctly, once designated not only the large guardian bird of the farmyard, but also the sense of hearing. Mother Goose is also the primal hearing, that which hears the primal language, the language of nature, spoken by the little naked man seated on a stone, whom Cyrano de Bergerac met on reaching the world of the sun. As for the animal itself, the great migrator, who twice a year carves a furrow through the sky between the north and south, is necessarily the transmitter of something between the distant lands in which it alights. The goose was often considered to be a messenger. In both Egypt and China, it connected the heavens and the earth. For the Gauls, it brought signs from the other world. The legend of Lebedea in Boeotia, recorded by Pausanias connects. That's funny. I've been doing everything really French, and I was like, just Kiwi accent. Recorded by Pausanias, flaming Pausanias, connects a goose with a spring that has water of unique properties. Oh man, this is deep. Hercyna was a companion of Persephone and guarded her geese. One day, when frolicking in the grove, one of these birds escaped her supervision and hid in a cave. Persephone found it at the very moment when, under the rock beneath which the goose had found refuge, water started gushing from what would be the source of a river to which the name of the nymph was given. Since that day, beneath the greenery, a gulf sucked down into its depths those who wished to consult the oracle of Trophonius after they had been purified in the water of the Hercyna, whose source was the hiding place of the goose. Could the grove or garden of the goose, the 63rd square, and the objective of the famous goose game that was renewed by the Greeks, be a recollection of this sacred grove? Now, one thing I really want to do is, I'm hoping Dr. Stephen Farmer, from my favouriteest book in the whole world, Animal Spirit Guides, which really, Animal Spirit Guides, how do I explain it? It's why I did everything that I do. It's why I did the Secret Kindergarten, because the synchronicities, basically if you try to help children, which meant for me going to Early Learning Centre, and give that 110%, well, that tests your patience, grows your intuition from testing your patience, because that's how that works, and you have to have unbelievable amounts of patience to just, maintain your composure amongst 30 odd toddlers, preschoolers. Then you start to get symbols and signs as synchronicities. The whole cliche, you see the 1111 on the alarm clock, where you wake up in the middle of the night and it says 111, and you're like, 111, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, for me, it was like weird things with animals all the time. So I started to look at, which I never knew was a thing, animal spirit guides, because I was never exposed to anything in terms of natural, spiritual stuff ever. So what's the point of my story? That I'm going to this book, Animal Spirit Guides by Dr. Stephen Farmer. Come on, there's got to be a goose here. Oh, what a letdown. What a massive... Oh, it's there! Goosey! I'm just going to read this because the thing about Dr. Stephen Farmer's work is that it's just a dictionary of animals and then the meanings. And the meanings I can corroborate through looking at other places. He takes the symbolism of the animal from all kinds of sources. Also Native American, right? But he takes the symbolism from all cultures and from all just things. So like, let's just see what the goose says. If the goose shows up, this means this is a time of good fortune. So be receptive to and appreciative of all the good things that come to you. That's a very universal thing already. So I like that. It's important to be grateful and receptive to good things. And that's how good things happen. And that's not really a New Age thing. Even if you are exposing the predator class and all that sort of thing, you still have to be receptive and appreciative of the good things that come to you. And you also have to visualize, this is rich coming from me, that you have to visualize, the world without that predator class, which is a good thing, which is a fortunate thing. We have to try and visualize these things. So anyway, I'm going way off here. So the Goose also says to call on your ancestors for their guidance and protection. And once you do so, you'll notice a significant increase in your spiritual awareness. So the goose might be the sort of spirit animal of fairy tales, and possibly this dynamic that, I keep raving on about because I just did bizarre things in my life. Reread some of your favorite fairy tales and legends and see what new meanings you can get from them now as an adult. Write creative and imaginative stories, either about actual experiences you've had or those that are made up. There's poetry slipping in there. Dramatic pause for everybody there. Because, yeah. Oh, this is great. Even though it may not always appear to be so, you're very well protected. I find that comment to be a little bit throwaway in these kind of books, because it's good to hear nice things though, right? Yeah. So, when would you call on the goose if you got right into animal spirit guides and said prayers? I ask Goose for help. Well, you'd call on the goose when you want to renew the magical and wondrous nature of childhood through the eyes of your inner child. You're planning a spiritual pilgrimage to any sacred land or area. You're about to be married or enter into a new relationship and want to solidify your commitment. You and your partner want to make a baby. You need some inspiration for a creative project. So inspiration and creative projects, there's something in that. I think one of my theories thus far is that the fairy tales were calculated. There was some calculation coming from a spiritual scientific method, is what I'm trying to say. An intuitive story that they received, that the writers of these received signs and symbols through using their intuition. And it was from a time where young children were also held in very high regard, highly revered, which has been, which we have discovered is true from ancient Indo-European times. Which, if people want to get, which researchers generally theorize that that's as old as fairy tales themselves are, or the origins of. So, yeah. And the goose may symbolize, well, I think the goose symbolizes all that we have just covered. So, moving on to Old Wives' Tales. And I think this is also implying that, if we look at Mother Goose stories, Old Wives' Tales, Blue stories, that they can be traced back to the same creative method, well, this creative output that Mother Goose seemed to have something to do with. All right, too much blah, 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 Gino. I'm getting carried away with myself. Mother Goose stories, the tales. Oh, wait, I just read this, didn't I? Yeah. No, Old Wives' Tales, sorry. Old Wives' Tales. How far back do we have to go to find the oldest wife and storyteller? Wouldn't it be the mother of the gods, the extremely ancient goddess known as the Great Mother, the above-ground and underground Mother Nature herself? While Christianity cast this Black Madonna into Saint Anne, Christ's grandmother, She can be found in some tales in the ambiguous role of the ogre's wife, or the surprisingly kind one of the devil's grandmother. She can often be recognized beneath the ugly, wrinkled skin of the witch. Among the names given these tales, that of one-eyed stories, I sense some Odin coming up, is certainly the least gracious. Figuratively speaking, the adjective one-eyed, which can mean shady in French, describes a suspicious spot of ill repute, or one that is unkempt. A one-eyed tale is one that has been established in a suspect manner, and individuals who have lost the use of an eye have long had a reputation in the countryside as people to steer clear of, as they were suspected of being in league with the devil and capable of casting spells. They were attributed with powers their fellows did not possess, such as the same ability possessed by serpents to hypnotize birds. They also possessed a disturbing clairvoyant ability owed to their contact with the spirit world. However, the one-eyed had illustrious ancestors. A Roman legend tells how the hero, Publius Horatius Circles, in the 6th century BCE, denied the troops of the Etruscan, King Porsenna passage across the Sublicious Bridge over the Tiber, thanks to the paralyzing power of his one remaining eye, thereby saving the young Roman Republic. And the Scandinavian god Odin, who way more people worshipped not that long ago, I would say still less than about 1,000 years ago. Less than 1,000 years ago. No, 1,000. Get my maths right. About 1,000 years ago, guys. Also only with one eye, could, with a single glance, freeze his enemy or dull the cutting edge of his weapon. A completely amoral warrior god, he was capable of awarding victory to the most undeserving, as stated in this verse of an Eddic poem. Shut up, Odin. You have never known how to divvy up victory among men. Often you give it to he whom you should not have given it, to the poltroon the victory. It was in exchange for one of his eyes that Odin obtained his magical powers, as well as his poetic knowledge. But yeah, I forgot to say, here we are talking about poetry again. Man, we're talking about poetic knowledge, right? Interesting! Got to find a better word. Okay, let's go to the thesaurus. Let's just do this right now. Oh my gosh. This is so bad of me. Interesting. Thesaurus. I hate the word interesting. I just feel like it's just some... You know what? Narcissists say interesting all the time. They say it all the time, and that's part of why I hate it. Okay? And we've done work on narcissism. Alluring. It is alluring. Compelling. Okay, compelling. Yes. I am compelled by the topic today, and I am compelled by the parallels between perhaps tarot, poetry, fairy tales. I am compelled by this Mother Goose thought. Fascinating. Yeah, that's kind of a bit fascinating. Compelling. Okay, guys, that was really bad of me. Thought-provoking. All right, here we go. So it was in exchange for one of his eyes that Odin obtained his magical powers, as well as his poetic knowledge, from a giant named Mimir, whose name means memory. So that's a little bit of an allegory to, sacrifice for tapping it for gaining qualities and essentially magical powers that every human being has the potential to have through intuition. All that psychic stuff, right? So there's a little bit of a correspondence there. Later, Odin embalmed and preserved this giant's large head, which he consulted when he needed to make a big decision. Grand Master of magic and poetry. There we go. God of storms, the dead, and of war, over which he presided not by valor, but by ruse and artifice and psychopomp, and incorporated it with Mercury by the Romans. The supreme shaman, Odin, according to Regis Boyer's description, did not, strictly speaking, teach so much as inject his wisdom. And that's what, so it's sort of about influence, right? Rather than direct instruction, which is the big problem in the world today, including the truth movement. People think they are supposed to directly teach and instruct children. And they also think they're doing it because they want to create the world that they aren't actually envisaging properly. Because if they were, they wouldn't be doing that. Hanging for 9 days from the world tree Yggdrasil. A harsh initiatory ordeal gave him knowledge of the sacred meaning of the runes. There we go. So he sort of sacrificed and kind of devoted for his life in service of others. There's a little bit of that, Jesus story there, right? And that's the appeal there, right? Because that's what we're really supposed to do as human beings as we unfold that in Otherworld connections. And we do that in order to get magical powers, obtain magical powers. Syntropy, to go in the upwards direction, in the positive direction, and to grow as a species in the correct way, in the right way, in a spiritual way. Natural intelligence, not artificial intelligence. Okay. The Germanic Wotan corresponds exactly with the Scandinavian Odin, and he can also be compared with the Irish Balor, king of the Fomorians, which I think is why they say so many people worshipped Odin. I think it's Odin and his similes, I think. And not that long ago, probably just over 1,000 years ago, this was actually going on. Which is not a very long time ago, really. What I'm trying to say is, imagine you could find out about your great times, Great to the power of 11, 12 perhaps. Great to the power of 13, grandfather, grandmother. Wouldn't that be just amazing? He of the dark powers who also saw with only one eye. There we go. All one-eyed gods. German, Scandinavian, Irish. Balor's daughter, coupled with one of the Tuatha de Danann, the celestial race. And that's tying into the she, right? And gave birth to the luminous... Oh, man, I can't read any of this stuff, man. Lugh, L-U-G-H, who was skilled in all the arts. One day, Lugh, I think that's how you say it, assured victory to the troops of his father's side by hopping on one leg around the army with one eye shut, before slaying his maternal grandfather by destroying his single yet formidable eye with a cast stone. The adjective one-eyed, used to describe old wives' tales, cannot help but reveal the sacred and powerful nature of these singular figures, which lies beneath the amusing form of the stories. Like the one-eyed individuals of the Roman legend or Norse myths, these tales have the power to captivate those who hear them and into whom they inject their force and teaching. Great way to explain how, archetypes, symbols affect us and resonate with us. Okay, so moving on to cock and bull stories. Cock and bull stories is the common, that's Black Labrador Ernie playing guardian of the household, of the property. So funny, the only time he didn't bark was when this guy was riding a Harley Davidson and he was wearing a balaclava. I'm not even joking. Riding down the street. This is the only time Ernie never barked at someone. That guy looked terrifying. Ernie completely turned around and pretended to be sniffing a flower. Yeah, thanks for your protection, mate. He's just a baby, 1 year old. Okay, so cock and bull stories. English translation for the French term that means tales to send one to sleep while still standing up. This is amazing. This is compelling. There we go. This is quite a strong image. It is easy to envision the listener. I've got to say, sending one to sleep while still standing up, that is childcare. Looking after kids, you are dying inside while still standing up. And that space is the theta brainwave space. See, I'm an expert on this now. This is quite a strong image. It is easy to envision the listener hypnotized by the storyteller's words and paralyzed on both legs. While some think this expression can only tell of the boredom of hearing said things that are so absurd the listeners are caught by an irresistible urge to sleep, others believe that preferring to listen with only one ear, following the advice of the Pontife Book, will open other doors, which you might know about things like, okay, say you're listening to, say you're listening to the What on Earth is Happening podcast, and there's Mark Passio yelling at you, and you get out your pen and paper and you do some drawing while you're listening. That's going to open up a door that will allow you to receive the truth with a capital T that Mark Passio may be saying. And anything else. I don't know why that came to my head. Well, because I basically discovered most of what I discovered through his work. But anyway, on the frontispiece of the first edition of Perrault's Stories or Tales of Times Past, the posture of the three young listeners remarkably illustrates the trance into which the spinner's words seem to have plunged them. Each has his or her eyes fixed on the storyteller. Okay, I'm just going to shut this door now. 10 minutes to go. All right. A young boy is sitting on the right in a chair with his back to the fire. He has a tranquil expression on his face in which the hint of a smile can be seen. He is obviously enjoying the beauty of the story and the movement of the plot on which his full attention is focused. The boy in the middle is kneeling in front of the woman with both hands affectionately placed on her apron, as if trying to feel closer to her. His gaze is telling of the emotion in which the dangers incurred by the story's hero have plunged him, as well as perhaps a growing interest for a sleeping beauty, whom he would also like to arouse with a kiss. The young girl standing to the storyteller's left has moved into the other world of the story. It is easy to see that she is no longer in the shadow-darkened country room. Her wide-open eyes are looking through the spinner, beyond whom her gaze is allowing her to visit rural huts and palaces, cross seas, enter forests, and scale mountains, where princes, wild animals, kings' daughters, and turkey maids are cavorting. Her hair is arranged in the way of a noble lady of the time of Louis XIV, as is the laced bodice over which opens her dress. For the time of the story, in the centre of the action, she is a daughter of high birth, enduring trials and tribulations, and passing through wild adventures. Entirely tuned in, she has crossed the threshold of the door of the Tales of My Mother the Goose, whose engraver took pains to place the keyhole level with the storyteller's head. In her active dreaming state, the girl may also be able to bring back some object of her desire from the old woman's world. The image's creator, to assist her in this operation, that reason and common sense tell us is impossible, has visibly left her an essential tool near the centre of the composition, placed on a corner of the fireplace. A brightly burning candle is illuminating the scene. The vertical height of this light indicates the direction of the journey that this young girl seems to have achieved within herself, in order to sow the seeds of the imagination inside the reality of the structure of her mind. By hearing this story, the young girl has grasped the small flame from which she has received the power to sleep upright. We know that during the stage of sleep, the mind recharges itself with new energies. Sleeping upright in the waking state, while listening to a story, could signify that the listener is drawing the elements for this recharging from the progression of the story. So I think that kind of that sort of highlights why reading fairy tales to kids is so important, I reckon. Recharging. You are charging these batteries that might not otherwise get charged. That's what I think. Airy Tales. Here we go. Let's have a look. Yeah, we got time. A story in air is, of course, a story that has no foundation on solid ground or in the everyday visible reality. It sometimes happens when speaking thoughtlessly that someone will speak words in the air, i.e. empty words, which are forgotten as soon as uttered, or which the speaker wants the listener to forget, as they have caused the listener pain or resentment. One would therefore like to ignore, but more importantly, let the interlocutor ignore what kind of profound earth is actually represented by this air, in which such words without our knowledge have been able to set their roots. There are also promises in the air, empty promises, that are made out of extravagance or necessity, but are never kept. These expressions allude to the instability of air, an invisible and impalpable domain that can only hold up birds, smoke, and clouds when our flying machines are not grumbling through it. The air in which we are immersed, and that fills our lungs, which breathes around us in all directions, can bring in the space of a moment heat or cold, sunlight, rain, storm, or tempest, or give in the silence of an evening the feeling of a serene and eternity, belongs to the subtle world of breath that in several languages has given its name to the spirit. The Spiritus Dei Ferebatur Super Aquas of the Vulgate is the Latin translation of a second verse of Genesis, whose meaning, closest to the Hebrew, is the wind of God fluttered over the surface of the waters. or the breath of he the gods. According to Faber d'Oliver's translation, well, that was his translation, the breath of the he the gods. The wind has carried it into her belly. The emerald tablet tells us in regard to the philosopher's stone, expressing the subtlety of the body spirit that gave it birth and that the alchemists called Mercury. The episodes from Airy Stories do not originate in the density of perceptible concrete events in history, no more than the heroes of gods or gods of antiquity are the glorious recollections of dead figures. As the partisans of humorism try to see them, their progenitor is a subtle breath. Their progenitor is a subtle breath of mental facts, undoubtedly capable of engendering such events, but first and foremost responsible for the emergence and perennial nature of the human race. In this sense, fairy tales could be conceived as factual stories, these facts which are impossible to place in our space-time. These once-upon-a-time figures can be incorporated on the psychological plane as what Jung called archetypes. They form the roots of the upturned tree that George Ripley described as being buried in the ground of paradise, which alchemical treatises also called the terrestrial heaven, or quite simply the air. Some of these texts teach that this tree bears fruits that are nothing other than the metals inside the earth. The Hindu Bhagavad Gita, for its part, presents the tree's sprouts as objects of the senses. We can take as a given that these airy stories, these tales from the time when animals talked, were actually born, as often said, during the mythical and timeless period of the Golden Age. This is on condition, though, of not affixing this age to the source of an impossible to determine the origin of humanity, but rather to extend it through all time to the origin of human nature perpetuated within each individual of this species. Now that was a heavy paragraph, that one. So there we go. Airy stories, fairy tales, archetypal stories. There we go. And we will leave it there for this week's edition of Otherworld Connections. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, I find this compelling. And we will continue of how the Tales of Wonder got their name, to uncover a little bit about what fairy tales are really about and what they're for. Much love, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, and we'll see you at the next one.